Which politician in Britain today can claim the biggest personal political mandate? Answer, my guest today, the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson. He won the job with the votes of 1.2 million Conservative voters. He promised to turn London into the greatest city on earth. Well, just over 1 year on, is this most quotable of British politicians matching his words with deeds? Mayor Boris Johnson, welcome to HARDtalk.
Hi.
Been doing the job for a year. Is it?
Slightly more than a year.
Yeah, slightly more. Is it proving harder than you expected?
It's a big job, and it's a wonderful job, but I'm very lucky in having a very, very good team. You know, I think probably I would say it is more, there is a quite dizzying amount of executive authority that you wield as Mayor of London. Probably quite terrifying for some of the people who know me, but it is a wonderful job to do.
No, absolutely
right. You know, I was a shadow minister for paperclips and forward planning Eastern Europe or whatever. You know, higher education and that kind of thing. I'd been an editor for a long time, and so I suppose I'd wielded a certain amount of executive authority there. But it doesn't really prepare you for something like being Mayor of London, which is just, you know, the most incredible job that I've ever had. I suppose what it's like is it's a bit like when you become a parent for the first time. You have a sudden dizzying sense of responsibility.
I do remember that, yeah. But
do you know what I mean?
I do. But you just said something interesting. You said I have a great team around me. The problem is you've lost a lot of your team.
Oh, on the contrary.
Five of your key personal appointments have since disappeared under a cloud.
Stephen, well, some of them disappeared under a cloud, some of them disappeared. And other circumstances, I think, like HARDtalk, we have a hard policy. We're hard as nails in our employment policy. And
I don't know what the Oscar Wilde quote is, but losing 3 deputy mayors within a year looks like more than coincidence. It looks like somebody's judgments.
We've had a 50%, you're perfectly right to say we've had a 50% reduction in the number of deputy mayors, and that's part of our general cost cutting.
Now, the leader of your party, the Conservative Party, David Cameron, is trying to take a grip, at least as far as he can, on his own party. He's told his shadow cabinet that they must abandon all their outside activities, their second jobs, by the end of the year. Now, you are the Mayor of London. I checked this morning. I believe your salary is just short of £140,000. You have a massive job. You've just told me how dizzyingly exciting and challenging it is. And yet, you have a contract with a national newspaper worth £250,000 a year.
Chicken fee, yeah, okay.
Chicken fee.
Now, listen, let's be
do you think most people in London would regard it as chicken feed, particularly at a time of economic recession, that you're earning £250,000 on the side as a newspaper?
Well, I don't presume to ask what you earn from the taxpayer, and I think that, frankly, there's absolutely no reason at all why I should not, on a Sunday morning, before I, do whatever else I need to do on a Sunday morning, should not knock off an article as a way of relaxation, a kind of mental. Why shouldn't I? I mean, do you really see a reason why I shouldn't? I think it's.
I'm just looking at your party leader, who has sent a signal to all of his senior people saying you can't have these outside activities. If the public are to believe that we are truly committed to serving their purposes, we have to be fully focused on the job at hand. I'm wondering, when you're getting £250,000 a year from somebody else for writing, whether you're really fully focused on your job as mayor.
Well, as I say, I see absolutely no reason why I should not, do what I write. I write anyway. I happen to write extremely fast. I don't see why on a Sunday morning I shouldn't knock off an article. If someone wants to pay me for that article, then that's their lookout. So, and of course, I make a substantial donation to charity. From maybe that money should not go to charity. Maybe you'd rather I didn't make those contributions to charity.
Let's talk about your vision for London. There is no doubt that London's been badly hit by the recession, partly because it is and traditionally has been so reliant on banking, financial services, what the City of London does. Do you believe one of the messages of what we've seen in the last 18 months is that London should wean itself off that reliance on the city?
No, on the contrary. I think that's a mistake to think that London is somehow totally reliant on financial services.
No, I didn't say totally, but I think
is true.
Something like 16% of London's economy
Yeah.
revolves around the city and its activities.
Well, there's absolutely no reason to wean ourselves off financial services. I don't quite understand what you mean by that. The important thing is to recognise that London has fantastic strengths which aren't just financial services, and I'm thinking of the higher education sector, the medical science, the arts, culture, media sector, which you're an illustrious representative if heavily funded by the taxpayer. And I think we should remember the strengths of the London economy are very, very broad. And we should also make sure that we don't allow the current hysterical, and in many ways justified, resentment against the bankers and all the mistakes they've made to jeopardise the strength of London's financial services.
You made a very high-profile declaration defending the rights of hedge funds and saying that the European Commission's plan to regulate hedge funds across Europe much more heavily would be catastrophic for London. It's very hard for a lot of Londoners to understand why you should spend your political capital defending hedge funds.
We've put in place measures which will help people on low incomes to get through the recession, and we've put in a 24-hour freedom pass so that older people can use the buses before 9 o'clock in the morning. What we are doing is looking at the totality of the London economy, making sure that we promote every aspect of it, and that's why we're introducing a new Promote London Council to make sure that we come up with the best possible way of projecting London overseas, and also ensuring that we defend the hedge funds and the bankers and whatever it happens to be from unnecessary and ill-thought-out attacks. I'm not saying
that... Is
that...
there not a lesson from the last 18 months, and that is London City does need to be regulated much more closely?
It's certainly true that there were colossal mistakes made by the bankers, and I'm not going to defend these guys. I mean, and it's outrageous that they're all hanging on to their taxpayer-funded bonuses when they should be donating them to the Mayor's Fund for London, for instance. But what you shouldn't do is pile in and institute a lot of badly thought out regulation which will actually jeopardise the interests not just of the City of London, this is the key point, but also of many, many hundreds of thousands, not millions of people in this city and in this country who depend on the revenues they produce. There is nothing wrong with us having a strong financial sector, everything right, and I propose to defend it.
But is there not some insecurity about your position? Because you seem to be saying, whether it be about hedge fund reform or indeed the top rate of tax, which you heavily criticised and asked your own party, the Conservative Party, to take a stand on and promise to repeal this 50% top rate of tax. There's an insecurity here because you constantly say, if we do these things, the danger is many of the entrepreneurs, the fat cat bankers, will leave London and go to New York or to Shanghai. What makes you so sure that they would want to leave London? London offers them much more surely than just relatively low taxes.
Well, if you look at what's happened just this very morning, you've got a situation in which McDonald's has announced, after basing its capital, its European headquarters here since 1974, that it's going to Geneva. Now, I think that is a sad decision. I think it's the wrong decision. They're making it on grounds of intellectual property tax that this government has instituted. I think the government has done the wrong thing. It's my job, Stephen, when I see taxes coming in that I think will send important corporations to foreign capitals, that will deter talent from coming here. It's my job to stick up for London. And by the way, it's not, the key point to bear in mind here is it's not just bankers. There are plenty of high earners in other sectors who might equally feel that we have the top 4 law firms, 4 out of 6 top commercial law firms are in London. We have the top accountancy firms. We have the top medical science facilities in London. These are people who could very well find that their talent was more welcome in another city. And it's my job to represent the needs of London. And I'm not just talking about...
if I may say so, are out of step with your own party on this, because David Cameron and George Osborne...
I doubt very much. Actually, I bet my own party supports me completely on this.
They have, under close questioning, refused point blank to say that they will repeal the 50% top rate of tax. You know they have.
Well, no,
because,
but
frankly, they say we can't afford to make that sort of promise given the state of the public finances.
Yeah, but this is just a sort of elaborate political elephant trap that's been dug for the Tories by the Labour government to try to get them to say, just to try.
So you say to Cameron, look, be brave, be courageous, be Tory, and promise to repeal the tax, do you?
Obviously, in the run-up to an election, it is not particularly popular to go to the people and say, we're going to cut the top rate of tax. I happen to think that it is not economically sound thing to do. The yields that it produces are very, very small. And it does, have this deterrent effect.
Does Cameron need to be braver?
David Cameron is going to make a fantastic Prime Minister, and he's going to get elected in the next year, but he's got to make some quite difficult calculations about Labour attempting to snooker him and making him look as though he's endlessly championing the rich. Okay, that's the problem.
Let's talk about another element of the Johnson vision for London. We talked a little bit about the city, about the economy. You also promised during your election campaign just over a year ago to make London one of the greenest major cities in the world. You, of course, famously cycle around the city, and that's one that'll
And so we shall. And it's going to be just fantastic. And if you want to talk about cycling...
I haven't finished my question yet. I know it's long-winded, but let me finish it.
Yeah.
The point I'm getting to is that how does that square with one of your earliest decisions, which was to take one of the great innovations of London, the congestion charge, and actually reduce it in size and reduce its effect?
Well, the congestion charge in the Western Extension Zone was imposed without proper democratic approval, and it was actually imposed contrary to the wishes of the people of that part of London, and we've followed a manifesto commitment to listen to people, and if they wanted it taken out,
every environmental campaign person in this city says it was a terrible mistake, and you yourself are on the record.
Can I just say, in terms, if that's what you're going to try and beat, in terms of the environmental effect, it is vanishingly small.
Well, you yourself, in answer to a member of the London Assembly, said that it will increase traffic entering the extension area during charging hours by up to 15%. That's not insignificant. 15% more traffic in that part of London.
In terms of congestion has actually risen in the central zone and indeed in the Western Extension Zone throughout the period of its operation because the whole thing has been extremely badly managed. And if you have more congestion, then of course you have cars waiting for longer in jams and at lights, and producing far more emissions and far more particulates.
But you've also, if I may say so,
in terms of the environmental impact, you asked me about the environmental impact, not about traffic flows. In terms of the environmental impact, removing the Western Extension Zone is vanishingly trivial. And what we're going to do by way of moving towards greener vehicles and encouraging more cycling, greatly improving
on
public
the question
transport.
of greener vehicles, you've actually delayed, as I understand it, you've delayed the implementation of the third phase of what's called the low emission zone in London. You've also supported a massive expansion of the London City Airport, London's sort of third airport, and you've also said that you want to see a massive new airport in the Thames Estuary. How does all that square with you making London the greenest city in the world?
Because we're going ahead with phases 1 and 2 and 3 of the LES. What we're not doing...
you've delayed it, yes.
What we're not
doing, you've delayed,
we've postponed. That's because I didn't think it was right. You asked me earlier on about what we were doing to help people through the recession, and there's no doubt at all, if you want to clobber people, people driving their vans who need to get their businesses going now in very, very difficult circumstances, you hit them with a swingeing great new cost for their vehicle. And I didn't think this was the right time to put it in. What we are doing is a lot of other measures to promote low carbon vehicles of all kinds, and that's why we're putting loads of electric charging points around London. We're going to make London the electric capital of Europe, and that's one of the reasons why we're going for a new bus for London. Because I think it's absolutely crazy that we have on the streets of London 8,900 diesel belching buses. And the people who criticise me, they are avid aficionados, defenders of these diesel belching buses. They want to keep the bendy bus on the streets of London for what atavistic, archaising reasons I cannot imagine. We want to have a low carbon vehicle. The two things that you mentioned, that's the third stage of the low emission zone and the Western Extension Zone, the congestion charge.
And of course, more flights that you want to see flying over London because of your airport plans.
I mean, I will not take any criticism from anybody about a modest expansion of City Airport when they are proposing to build a third runway at Heathrow. And
well, you're proposing to build a whole new international airport in the Thames,
flying and thereby greatly increasing congestion in West. People have got to understand the environmental objections to a third runway at Heathrow.
We don't have so much time.
Well,
I do want to get to
because your international audience will want to know this. A third runway at Heathrow, because they fly into Heathrow. A third runway at Heathrow is a disaster, and not just because it means that planes have to fly over the central conurbation to get to the main hub airport, but also because of the huge extra volume of road traffic in West London. No mayor of London could conceivably tolerate such a measure.
Let's talk about another aspect of London's character, its essence, and that is its ethnic mix. Now, interesting stats. According to the 2006 Office of National Statistics estimates, 42% of London's population belong to ethnic groups other than white British. Apparently, as of 2006, London's foreign-born population is 2.25 million and rising fast.
Yeah, I think it's one of the great strengths and geniuses of the city. And actually, if you look at the demographics of London, we're not unlike New York. And I think that's one of the reasons London is so attractive as a place to come to live and to work. And I think
when you embrace it so warmly, hang on,
let me give you one statistic that your viewers might be interested in. When the Olympics come to London in 2012, there will be 50 countries which have a home crowd here of more than 10,000. There's no other city like that in the whole of the world.
Why is it then, because you embrace it so warmly with that rhetoric, why is it that you signally failed during the election campaign to connect with so many of the ethnic minority voters in London? Ipsos Mori have done an analysis of the election result, and they show clearly that you won huge majorities in the largely white suburbs. You did significantly less well in inner London, and particularly in those areas with high concentrations of minorities. Why do you think that is?
Can I say, Stephen, I don't think that reflects the state of London opinion now. I think if you look at...
But why do you think it was, Mr. Mayor?
Well, it might be, Stephen, if you look back at the election campaign, which was pretty closely fought and tough business, there was a lot of stuff flying around that was deeply unpleasant.
You were constantly, by your opponents,
deeply unpleasant and inaccurate.
Well, there are quotes out there, and I'm sure some people are familiar with them, but in your writings, going back 6 or 7 years, you referred, and you know as well as I do what I'm going to quote, Tony Blair on a trip to the Congo, you wrote, of tribal warriors breaking out in watermelon smiles. The Queen, you suggested, has come to love the Commonwealth because it supplies her with regular crowds of flag-waving pickaninnies. These are things that you wrote, albeit humorous, and lots of people in London from minority communities were deeply offended. Do you regret it?
I thought, by the way, I think we have fantastic support from communities across London.
Do you regret, now that you're in the Mayor's office, writing those things?
And do you know what I really think about this, Stephen? I think it's pretty amazing that in view of all the things that we're trying to do to move London forward, in view of all the things that we're trying to do to get the city through a recession, in view of all the improvements that we are bringing in to make London the greenest, cleanest, safest city on earth, and you haven't even asked me about crime and what we've done there to reduce crime. I think it's pretty spectacular that the BBC's best shot is to try to dredge up a 7-year-old quote, which, by the way, everybody
there is a reason. You may call it madness on my part. There's a reason behind my madness, and that
what is the reason behind it?
I'll tell you what the reason is. The reason is because you have much more recently said things like this. We must insist, you wrote recently, in a way that is cheery and polite on certain values we identify as British. If that means the end of spouting hate in mosques and treating women as second-class citizens, so be it. We must acculturate second-generation Muslims to our way of life. We must insist on the basic loyalty of immigrants to this country. Those are important thoughts you're having, but I'm just wondering whether you are going to have an audience for those thoughts given your record, and whether it would be better for you to say, look, I'm sorry, I regret the language I used in the past, but these are important things I'm saying now.
On that, there are important issues, and I do think that we're very, very lucky to be a city composed of so many different races and faiths and all the rest of it. And I think it is a huge economic advantage to London, because actually it's not just that the people coming to the Olympics will have this huge home crowds, but if you think about McDonald's and the sad case I mentioned earlier, if you're a foreign company, if you're a Chinese company or you're coming and you want to think, where should we go in the world to locate? The fact that you've got these communities here, that are possibly from your own home country, I think makes London incredibly attractive as a place to invest. So I want to build on that.
How do you try to further that objective in such a multi-ethnic city?
One of the things that we've proposed, and you'll be familiar with the problem, is lots of people in the city don't have the papers that they need. There are huge numbers of illegal immigrants in the city and indeed in the country. And so one of the things we've suggested is that in view of the extreme difficulty they have in actually being able to enter the economic system legitimately, they could be able to earn their right to an amnesty, earn their right to stay here.
450,000 people in London. It's believed there are that many people in London.
There are very large numbers, and I don't think, of course, that such a system could possibly work for all of them. And I don't.
How many do you think might be able to take advantage of that amnesty?
They'd have to have been here for a very considerable period of time.
Do you have an idea of a number?
More than. Certainly more than 4 or 5 years. It would have to be a long period of time.
You've put the proposal out there. Do you have an idea of a number that might take advantage of this?
Because there would be various, this is to get to your point, various hoops they'd have to go through to qualify. They'd have to show that they were loyal and that they understood the country they were in, and they wanted to have a sense of duty to the country they were in, and they'd have to pass various. They'd have to show they were of good character and not broken the law and all the rest of it.
You know, the Conservative immigration spokesman, Damien Green, responding to your idea of an amnesty, said it would send a signal around the world, come to Britain illegally and you can stay forever.
Well, the trick of it, I'm not sure it would send such a signal. The trick of it would be to do such a scheme without setting up a great pull on international immigration. That's obviously what we need to do. You know, I'm not pretending that's going to be easy, but I think if you look at the alternative, which is simply continuing with hundreds of thousands of people living in London without papers, without being able to enter the tax system, without being able to pay tax, and all the other injustices that follow, I think we do need to do something. And that is a proposal that I think deserves to be properly followed up and thought about by the government.
Unfortunately, we're nearly out of time, but in this interview, it's clear to me that you're fizzing with ideas. Many of the ideas that you've propounded from the mayor's platform, though, they're still national ideas. Whether it's on tax reform, whether it's on immigration policy, you still
I don't
want
believe
to be
we've
at
mentioned
the
the cycle hire scheme.
Well,
which
I
is
haven't,
coming
but it seems to me,
in.
is this not a fair point? You still want to be at the...
You haven't mentioned the cycle hire scheme.
But look, I haven't got time for everything, but it seems to me, if I may finish the point,
new bus for London.
You are still, and you want to be, at the centre of the national political debate.
Oh, I see. This is where you're going.
Well, it's an obvious question to end with. Will you go from here, the mayor's office, back to Westminster politics?
No, listen, I have a fantastic job. As I said right at the beginning, it is the most wonderful job I could possibly imagine in politics. All I want to do is work very hard at it for the next 18 months or so, and then if I still feel things are going okay, then I'll probably, I'd be mad not to have a crack at a second term. After a second term, heaven knows what I'm going to be up to.
But you're in your mid-40s. You've always, and your sister tells us in various pieces, that you are fiercely competitive and ambitious. You're in your mid-40s. You're one of Britain's best-known politicians. You're going to stay in politics, aren't you? Which suggests you're going to go back to the Conservative Party and look for a leadership role.
No, I honestly think that that's vanishingly unlikely. You're piling a great pelion of hypothesis upon an ossa of supposition, or the other way around. I mean, it is.
But don't.
It is very, very. I'm very, very lucky, as everybody in the world knows how lucky I am to be mayor of London. It was a very, very tough fight to get here. I'm going to work as hard as I can, do as good a job as I possibly can, and if I can survive that, then I'll be extremely pleased.
Mayor Boris Johnson.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for being on HARDtalk.
Thank you, Bob.